Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, and thank you for joining our yummy cheese, gelato, and eggs, all made from plants panel today. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are in the world today. We'll be streaming live on Zoom as well as Facebook today as usual. Please send any questions that you have either to the Q&A section on your Zoom or send a comment within your Facebook, and then we will respond to that. As usual, Karthika will moderate those questions and ask our panelists those questions as they come in or towards the latter part of the session today. So today's format will be a little different. We want to have a sort of entertaining and lively roundtable discussion with our panelists on a very yummy and delicious subject: cheese, gelato, and eggs. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's already making me hungry. So let's just start with maybe with cheese, because I think we have two panelists who represent cheese companies. So Veronica, when you say free from cheeses, what are they actually made from?
They are made from fermented cauliflower and hemp seed.
Fermented cauliflower and hemp seed.
Obviously. Okay. It was obvious to a fine dining chef who first created them, not obvious to anyone else in the world how he came up with that.
Yeah, so the chef that came up with it, I think he happens to be what they call a two-hatter in Australia, right? That's the equivalent of like a 2 Michelin star chef. Would that be fair?
Yes, back in Australia, but in the US, nobody knows who he is, which I take delight in because he's also my husband and I can tease him about it.
But he did have a very famous restaurant in Melbourne, right? Lume or something like that, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes. He's not involved in the restaurant anymore, but he had it for about 5 years. And yeah, it was very, very successful.
Oh, wonderful. So then over to you, Kobe, on Please Cheese, right? I hope I'm saying that correctly. Please like in plant-based cheese, or please like in please and thank you?
Well, both. So we actually named the company because we're from New York and we had this obsession of people ordering pizza with extra please on top. Or can I get a burger with please? And that was really where it all started from. People think New Yorkers are rude. I couldn't disagree more. And we wanted to kind of bring that politeness back into the world.
By forcing them to say the word.
You're forcing them to say please, huh?
Let's say please.
So the photographers now, instead of saying say cheese, will have to say please.
My toddler is almost 2 years old, and that's what she says.
That's cute. Okay, so what's the main ingredient in your cheese?
So we wanted to go the allergen-friendly route. My wife is a teacher, and she saw too many students suffering from lactose intolerance and from soy allergies. And at least in New York, you're not allowed to bring any nut products into schools. So we kind of went around and we were like, well, soy is a bean. What other kind of beans are there? And our main ingredients for our formulation are fava beans and a very unique special potato protein that brings it all together. It gives it a really nice texture and meltability.
Oh, wow. So I did happen to, last September at Anuga, which is one of the world's largest food exhibition in Cologne, taste a fava bean butter, which is very good.
Yeah, it's a really great ingredient.
Yeah, wow. So a fava bean and potato starch. Wow, yeah. That's great. So in other than that, Jared, gelato. Now it's so boiling hot in Delhi today. American equivalent Fahrenheit would be 104 degrees, and that's less warmer than it was a week ago at 45. I would love to have a gelato right about now. What do you use instead of dairy to make your gelato?
So at the moment we use cashew and coconut, and we use a blend of them, which we've been doing since we started. But one of the things I will say that we actually look at this as an ongoing innovation process. There's been over 100 years of rigorous dairy research, figuring out how to make it perfect. And the plant-based space, as we all know, is still very early stage, and we're discovering new things like, oh, you can make cheese out of cauliflower. Who knew, right? And so I think it's the same thing on all dairy fronts and really plant-based fronts in general, that the companies that are going to continue to grow and develop, much like we're seeing Impossible come out with version 1.0, version 2.0, version 3.0, I think we all need to keep innovating and figuring out ways to make it taste even better, be even healthier, and bring the price point down to compete with the traditional products. So we're actually working on our next iteration, which is an improvement over what we've already got out on the market, which we're really excited about. Still cashew and coconut based, but bringing in some new things.
Oh, wow. That's great to hear. And Karthik and Shraddha, what, I know you're still early R&D stage. Are you in a position to disclose to us what ingredients you may be targeting in your eggs?
So as compared to other companies, we have taken a multi-protein approach while creating Evo egg. So we already have that much crop biodiversity in India, right? So there are more than 300 plus varieties of chickpea, 100 plus varieties of mung beans and other dry beans in the world. So in fact, India is the largest producer of dry beans in the whole world. And that's why we figured that, why not use this kind of incredible crop biodiversity to formulate, amazing products. So that's why we took the multi-protein approach. And one of them is, of course, our familiar mung bean. Because it gives a great functionality to egg and emulsification properties, gelling properties, etc. And the second ingredient actually, it's a surprise, and we are going to reveal at the launch. So yeah, definitely you should wait for that.
And when is the launch?
It will be around August or September.
Oh wow, right around the corner.
Yep.
Oh wow, okay. And I know that some of you brought some samples or packaging of your products. Can you guys share that with the audience?
These are just our sample packs that we send out to restaurants.
Okay, so that's a pleased cheese. Okay, and that's grounded, and that's the Revolution Gelato. So that's a freezer pack, right? I assume that.
Yes.
Very much like a Ben and Jerry's or a Haagen-Dazs size.
Precisely.
Okay. Wonderful. And then, of course, I'm not telling Evo to show it yet because the launch is in August, September. Yeah. Okay. So would your product be like a liquid egg? I mean, I think people are curious on the audience who may not be familiar with plant-based. They're thinking of an egg, but you're talking about a liquid egg, right? Very much like Justice.
Basically, when you beat the white and the yolk together, the liquid you get with which you make an omelet. So it's basically that yellow liquid in a bottle.
Okay. And this, assume, tastes just like egg. Right. Okay. So scrambled, all that is.
Fluffiness, all of it.
Can we make cake with it?
So
we are working on that.
We're working on that, but you can make omelet and scramble with it for now.
Oh, fantastic.
It's absolutely identical. So that's amazing.
Great. So Karthik, I think you had some questions, right?
Yes, I did actually. I'm really interested to find out how many of you are have a food technology or biotechnology background?
None?
Can you give us
Nobody. Nobody. Wow, that's really interesting because because my next question just kind of leads right into it. So if there are potential there are lots of potential innovators and entrepreneurs who are listening in at the broadcast today, right? And they want to do something in alternative dairy and egg space. So what kind of advice would you give them, especially given that none of you come from a food technology or biotech background?
Do you want us to just go, or should we?
Yeah,
anybody.
just go. Okay. Yeah, it's a fun panel, so just go.
Oh, okay, cool. So, one of the main reasons Karthik and I started working on Evo and actually even came together as a team is because we had this vision, we had the same mission that we wanted to create cleaner sources of protein for the Indian and the global market. So I think that to venture into the plant-based space, having a sort of mission is really important. And that's why I feel like a lot of founders, even if they don't have a biotechnology background or a food technology background, if it's a very mission driven company, I think that, you can hire the right kind of talent, but as a founder, the vision that you bring to the company, it needs to be very streamlined, and you need to know exactly, are you going to be an alternative egg company? Are you going to be a clean protein company? Or are you going to be a mock meat company? Like, what are you going to be?
Absolutely. I completely agree with Shraddha. And I think it doesn't really matter what your expertise is, because you should always double down on your strengths, I believe. Because if your strength is enterprise creation, you should focus on that. If your strength is brand and marketing, you should focus on that. And try to complement that with either, maybe hiring employees or getting on amazing people as co-founders. And I think, yeah, that's the thing, upcoming founders should focus on, doubling down on their strengths.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I agree. I'm an economist. I'm not a food technician. But I think the reason why we came up with a product that had never been done before is because my partner who's created the products is a fine dining chef. He's not coming from the same perspective of a food technologist or a food scientist. In fact, he's the guy that larger companies usually hire when their own food scientists can't crack recipes. They usually bring Sean in to just come up with something a bit more creative and outside of the box. And I think that's why we've actually managed to create a bit of a dent in this market.
And Jared, you're a psychology major that found Gelato, right?
That's right. No, I completely agree. And because what I think ends up happening is if you go the food scientist route, and it's worth, I mean, for people who are just tuning in, if you're completely new to this industry, it's worth knowing there are many food scientists out there who will help you create products. That's a thing that exists. They have expertise across a whole variety of fields. So that's certainly one route to go. But I do think there's an advantage in coming in with a little bit of naivety, because you can, as I was just saying, there's a lot that's just untapped. The same way aquafaba was kind of happened across. No food technologist ever would have come up with that on their own unless they were also just trying something out on their own. So I think there's something to be said for really just, in some ways, taking a trial and error approach at home, or however, depends on what you're trying to build. But then you can supplement it if you need to. When you hit roadblocks and when you're trying to commercialize something and scale it up, that's where the people who come with the food technology background, who really know and can look at things in a detailed way, can help make sure that what you've created or the people you've brought on have created can work and help you. They're better at, I think, acute challenges rather than big picture challenges.
And I think the issue that...
Wait, go ahead.
Sorry, I think the issue that you come up with as you start to scale up is that there's this ultimate tension between, the food technologists and manufacturing experts trying to make the recipe more efficient and, use, I guess, cut corners on things. It's like, oh, if you're using fresh potato right now, can we substitute that with modified potato starch? Or if you're using fresh cauliflower right now, can we use frozen cauliflower that we get cheaper from imported overseas or something like that? So they've definitely got that expertise, but it's just around a different mentality of making things more efficient. And that ultimately ends up in products that always taste the same. So there's huge advantages of coming with that naivety, as Jared said, and just being fearless in creating something that's never been done before.
I'll add one other thing, which is just because you don't have the background doesn't mean you can't gain the background. So I will say I was scouring the internet and I found myself reading, dense articles about how this and that protein acts and this and that fat acts, and you can give yourself an education. You don't need to have a formal education to learn quite a bit. So there's that too. There's a ton of resources out there so that you can self-educate as you need.
I think there's another advantage to being naive. I call it the George Gantzig phenomena. So George Gantzig was essentially a statistician. And while he was a graduate student, he solved, unknowingly, one of the, most unsolvable problems in statistics. while the professor just wrote down those problems over the blackboard, and he just mistakenly observed those problems as a homework assignment, and then he solved them. So like naivety will definitely prove something if you want to have a different perspective over a field.
Absolutely. So for us, we started as a hobby. One day I changed my diet, and I was sitting and having lunch with my brother, and he kind of looked me in the eye and he was like, what kind of effing New Yorker could live without pizza? And so I told my wife this story, and she was like, you know what, we're going to show him. And she went to the supermarket, she bought some dough, she bought the available plant-based cheese, she made her own sauce, and she created the ugliest pizza you've ever seen in your life, but it tasted amazing because of all the heart and hard work that went into it. And that's when we realized that, we should probably just make pizza at home. And all of a sudden we started posting it online, and people thought that we had a restaurant. And while we didn't mind the available plant-based cheeses because we were already vegan, our friends who didn't have the same dietary restrictions as us didn't appreciate the flavors as much as us. So we started experimenting, and slowly just gained so much traction that people literally thought we had a restaurant and would write from all over the world saying, oh, we're coming to New York, we want to come to your restaurant. And they would call us because our phone number ended up on Instagram, and they're like, can we order a pizza? It was so weird. And before that, I was a sales director for a luxury jewelry brand, and I was traveling around the country, going to stores like Saks and Neiman Marcus. And I was really responsible of seeing an idea go from a drawing. New York saying hi in the background, excuse me. We're just taking an idea and then actually bringing it to the final consumer. So I had the background of understanding how to bring an idea to fruition and how to sell it. And that's what made me go, well, okay, when you have an idea, how do you bring it to life? You go to the experts. And I'm very lucky to have found a really amazing group of experts who work with very unique and special ingredients that not a lot of people know about. And what's great about creating efficiencies is that you can then bring your product's price down and become competitive with the price of dairy. And that way there's no excuse for a large chain to replace your product with what they're selling already because the price point is equal. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. Like, I'm a New Yorker, and living without pizza was my biggest pain point. And I feel like just in talking to people over the last few years, it's not just my pain point. And it's really exciting to be able to talk to restaurants and say, hey, listen, I have this vegan cheese. And they're like, oh, vegan cheese, what's that? That's probably expensive. There's no margins on it. People don't like it. And then I send it to the restaurant. They go, how much is it? Oh, really? What? And all of a sudden you'll see these products become more cost effective and in line with the price of dairy. So like in New York, we have this saying that you can see how much the Subway will cost according to a slice of pizza. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a slice of vegan pizza to be the same price as a Subway ride.
Wow.
Amazing.
Just a message to the audience. I see a couple of members have raised their hand. If you can just type in the questions in the Q&A box, we'll get to it at some point. Thank you.
So the reason we asked that question is a little bit loaded because we constantly are working with people who are on the startup side of the business. And we're trying to create some awareness through this whole series of called, putting the planet on a pandemic diet, to expose people to the whole new world of, sort of food, which is this new plant-based, cell-based, and fermentation-based proteins, right? So how we can sort of change the world, make it more sustainable, and be cruelty-free if we adopt these new food trends. So, and what people constantly ask us is, well, you have to have that background, and and all these things. And we also realizing that the more labels that we read, and I'm sure Ivo will agree with this, most of those ingredients actually source from, the part of the world that, Karthik and I live in, which is India and Sri Lanka, right? We have all the pulses, we have the coconut oil, we have, cauliflower, maybe not as much, but yes, we do have that as well. So yeah, so I mean, all of these ingredients actually reside and are manufactured and are sold to all of the world from this part of the world. And I don't think there's enough of that innovation going on where people haven't even considered, for example, taking a cauliflower, making cheese, taking hemp or coconut oil, making something of our beans, right? I don't think the thought process has even occurred. I mean, it is happening now more so than it was before. So part of sort of having this, having you all on this panel also to sort of spur entrepreneurial activity, and say the fact that none of you have a food tech background would mean that, hey, it doesn't mean that you've got to sort of go back to school, learn food technology, and then start a company. If you have a good idea, you have a passion, you have a certain sense of purpose about something, start it and then find the resources to help you do it, like you guys have done. So that was what that question was, and the advice was phenomenal. So loved your insights and good advice on that. And
yeah, but just to add to that, you're absolutely right. India has probably all the ingredients necessary to make amazing plant-based products. And so one of the things that we're working on, I actually work with an Indian colleague who our motivation is within the next 10 years to bring production to India, because that's the gateway to Europe.
Yeah.
Not to Europe, to Asia, sorry. Because you're one of the most fertile countries in the region. It was mentioned earlier, one of the largest bean producers in the world. And even as far as pizza, you're the second largest pizza consumer in the world, and Domino's second largest. Yeah, I did a little research.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
You have over 1,200 Domino's in your country.
Yeah.
that I can agree to.
Yeah.
Wow.
People,
so the idea of bringing our technology, so for me, I want to make our product very popular in America, because I think when you go globally, people are very fascinated by the American product and the American brands, and then bring that technology to other places in the world so it becomes more streamlined, sustainable. I'd much rather bring my technology to another country and help grow that region rather than make it in one country and then sell it all over the world. I think that's how we create a better future for all of us.
That sort of nicely leads me into my next question, which is really about manufacturing. And I was just wanting to talk a bit about expansion plans. I'll just have a question for you, Veronica. Are you sort of on the lookout for co-manufacturing partners across the globe? And where next would you license your recipes and technologies to others?
It's unlikely we'll be licensing them anytime soon, but we're really committed to using 100% independent supply chains wherever we create our products. It doesn't make sense for us to export them into other markets at this stage, just because it does not align with a sustainable brand and adding those environmental miles onto the product, and then obviously adding all of that price onto it when we've worked so hard to bring the price down to be comparable to dairy. Doesn't make sense. Instead, we will be replicating our manufacturing model in overseas markets one by one. So we intend to expand into Australia, Canada, and Europe at this stage.
Fantastic.
Again, using local suppliers everywhere we go, local workers, and committed to never importing stuff from overseas when it just does not make environmental sense to.
I think it is an excellent point, Veronica. So like adding that much of an environmental cost to any product doesn't make much sense, and it's really commendable that you are already working on that from the beginning.
It can be hard because we could import hemp seed from China and it would be way cheaper. But to me, even prior to COVID, there just seemed to be a significant and growing risk in relying on those multinational supply chains for sourcing ingredients, and even packaging and labels. It, I think, is increasingly not making sense to me to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we made that decision from day one.
Yeah.
And Jared, what about the gelato? Obviously, I have lots of interest in the ice cream.
Well, so it's funny. We were actually briefly engaged in conversation with an Indian company about licensing our recipes, but our focus right now is really very much domestic. There's still a ton of room for us to grow and focus on here in our backyard. But eventually, you know, and we won't turn down an international opportunity. We'll explore it and see if it's something that makes sense. But we really want to keep our focus here for the time being. From a manufacturing perspective, you know, I think what Veronica brought up is exactly right, and it's just looking at what makes the most sense, and sometimes it's the obvious answer, and sometimes it's not. So, for example, like our production runs right now, you know, we're still at a point where we're not filling a truck. We're doing less than truckloads, partial truckloads. So, you know, at some point, maybe it'll make sense for us to have say a West Coast manufacturer. Right now, we produce in the East Coast. But I think at the moment, we're still going to see a greater sustainability impact and a greater cost impact by bringing in, continuing to consolidate our production, where we're bringing in, producing at full capacity, or working up to producing at full capacity, and seeing those savings in both the inbound and outbound freight, as well as the manufacturing, where you're having less line loss, et cetera, because you're producing in larger batches. So there's always, I think, a tension or just a balancing act between those two things to figure out just what makes sense where you are and where you're going.
What's the overall impact and process, not just at one point in time, which I think people tend to focus too much on. Like, for instance, in some cases, it might actually be better to source ingredients from overseas if it's completely unsustainable to produce them locally. So yeah, it's just looking at the overarching story, really.
Yeah, I remember reading something about that. There was an article put out a while ago when there was a really strong local movement, which I'm still obviously a big fan of, but it was commenting on, I think, like tomatoes in Canada or something like that. And basically what the guy was saying is, look, it's actually a lower impact to be importing a boat full of tomatoes from Argentina during the winter than it is to grow them in a greenhouse 50 miles down the road. And it's just, it's not obvious, and it's complicated. And I think everyone's starting to try to figure out how we wrap our heads around it, because it's just complex. But all we can do is try and use the best information we have.
Yeah, for sure. So if someone is interested in collaborating with you in the markets that you're looking at, obviously Veronica, Kobe, and Jared, how do they get in touch with you? I mean, what's the process?
I don't think there is a formal process.
Contact form, email, LinkedIn.
Usually for me, it's people contacting me on LinkedIn from overseas, offering to buy 50% of my company for a very small amount of money.
And what's your response?
I just say thank you for their interest, and we'll keep them in mind.
Awesome.
I think Veronica did share earlier on before we went live that she's been working on a new round of funding, and so she's now having to sort of figure out from all the suitors who she picks.
I keep saying to my partner, it is so much like online dating, going through the fundraising process, and it's giving me the exact same anxieties as I used to get when I was on Tinder. It's just ridiculous. And then working out how to turn people down politely as well when I know I'm not interested.
So when will we know who you've swiped right and who you swiped left?
We'll be closing this at the end of the month, so we're pretty excited.
Amazing.
Yeah, we're not far off at all.
Okay, fantastic. There's an audience question. Obviously, everyone's interested because we have Indians joining in as well. Will Evo Foods egg retail throughout India in August, September?
So initially, we're going to just have it be in Mumbai. But by the end of the year, we should also have it up and running in Delhi and Bangalore. And then post that, pan-India.
Delhi, there you go, Lavi.
Yeah, I can't wait to try. So is it a chill product, a frozen product, an ambient product?
It's a refrigerated as of now.
Refrigerated,
Yeah.
2 to 8 degrees centigrade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. And Jared, I read somewhere that you have some new flavors and also food service in the making. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so we've been serving food service for a while now, and we started as a result developing new flavors for that channel. So we've got 6 flavors that are out in our main line that's, in the pints like you saw earlier. But for the restaurants and ice cream shops and things like that, we started expanding and developing some new flavors. So right now we've got probably another, I don't know, 15 or 20 flavors that during the current pandemic, we decided to start doing some of those as kind of a limited availability, packing into pints to ship. As we started to see our e-commerce orders pick up, we thought that could be a nice way to just offer something different to people.
and what would some of those flavors be?
Well, so you can actually see them all on our website if you go to revolutiongelato.com.
Yeah.
But some of them, we've got a lemon ginger snap, toasted coconut, Mexican chocolate, etc.
You're putting him on a spot because he has to remember all of his 16 flavors.
Yeah, I know.
Anything he makes with bourbon in it is delicious. in my
Exactly.
experience.
But he did promise to show us how melt-worthy his ice cream or gelato is.
So Shraddha and Karthik, I mean, India is a big market for you in terms of the egg product. But have you any plans to go to the rest of the SAARC countries, the rest of South Asia, or the rest of the world for that matter?
Oh, definitely.
In terms of expanding.
So
Yep.
like Karthik said, that we have so much biodiversity. And then because of that, we can produce in India, which helps us quite significantly with our costs. So definitely, I mean, in India, if, we have to compete with the egg market, our prices for the product has to be super low. So I guess then creating for like other countries would be very, very easy.
Exactly.
We'd have price.
So you are initially targeting the top of the pyramid, the middle of the pyramid, or the bottom of the pyramid in terms of a market segment in India?
The top of the pyramid, right? Because I think that's where the customer acceptance will come from. That, like, those are the kind of people that are looking for better for you products, cleaner versions of protein. Not saying that other people don't care, but I think that the top of the pyramid are the people who are first to experiment and also have that disposable income. It's not like our eggs are are way more premium than a regular egg, but it's just, even to spend that much more, you have to have that kind of liquidity.
Yeah. Yep, makes sense.
And Kobe, are you super focused just on pizza, or?
Oh, thank you. That's actually a really good question. Our primary focus right now, the second, is pizza. But as we were developing our product, all of a sudden, companies like Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King started including the Impossible and the Beyond Burger into their menus. And one thing that we noticed in the USA is that they're still served with traditional dairy cheese.
Mm-hmm.
And we're really confused about it. And I actually contacted someone over at Impossible to find out why that was. And he explained to me this, so I'm going to explain this in Fahrenheit, and I apologize. Traditional cheese melts at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Most burgers are cooked at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And all the vegan cheeses up until this point have been developed primarily for pizza. And those melt at much higher temperatures because they're supposed to go into an oven. So what we found is that regular vegan pizza cheese just doesn't melt properly on a burger, not easily at least. It either has to be covered or it has to be melted a little bit before that. So we're in the process of creating what I call the rapid melt cheese. So that way it will just melt from the internal temperature of the burger, and it will allow big companies like a Burger King or White Castle to just place it on top instead of trying to add that extra step that like a smaller restaurant would do. So we're primarily focused on creating amazing experiences for comfort food.
Amazing experience for comfort food. Okay.
So, so we can expect a grilled cheese sandwich next.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
And we've constantly coming up with new flavors. I like my wife and I like everything very spicy. So we have different chipotle types and different chili types of cheeses that we make at home. We're slowly experimenting and seeing which ones we'll release. But those are the kind of innovations that we want to create.
So a little bit of a technical question for you, Kobe. So what's the shelf life of your product? It's chilled, I assume?
Yes, it's refrigerated, and it's exactly like traditional cheese because it's processed in similar machinery, and it goes through similar steps in its production. So the shelf life is estimated at 90 days right now.
Okay. And Veronica, what about yours? Shelf life?
6 months.
Six months. Okay. I won't ask you that question, Jared.
Because there wouldn't be any left in a freezer.
Exactly. Exactly.
If it was in my shelf, it won't last more than a couple of days.
His partner Ritu would say it wouldn't last more than an hour.
That's
Well, you're my kind of customers.
I know. So all of you were part of an accelerator program. Is that correct, or is that yeah? So
Yeah.
what was that experience like, and do you recommend that approach to other startups as well?
Oh, sorry.
Go for it, Kobe. Go for it. Sorry.
Well, I'll just say really quickly, I definitely recommend it. It was such a great experience for me specifically. Up until that point, I was working from home alone and just on the phone, and I'd schedule all my phone calls around when my toddler was asleep, which was very funny at first. And then she wouldn't sleep as much as it got a little tougher. So getting out of the house and actually going to an office and interacting with people before starting my company and creating my own office and my own work environment was super important for me. And it was such a great experience. Interacting with people who have similar backgrounds as you and similar passions. I mean, Veronica, Sean, and I were at the same table, and we're from different countries, different sides of the world, and we have very similar interests, and we've seen very random things that most people
Very obscure interests.
yeah, very obscure esoteric types of interests, and like we never met each other, but we totally were on the same page, and it was just fascinating to see like what kind of personality you have to go into the non-dairy cheese business. So it for me, it was such an amazing, positive experience. And another thing that I really benefited from was when we started this whole process, we knew that we wanted to be a retail product because we were getting such overwhelming demand from people asking for a retail product. And we weren't sure what the food service demand would be like. And thanks to BIV, we were introduced to some really huge players in that world and realized that we could start with food service, get traction and income doing that, and then use the PR push and the popularity of working with those companies to go into the retail space and actually guarantee sales as opposed to hope for sales. So that was my experience.
Kobe, you made us all jealous, huh? From the new batch, because we are working from home.
Oh yes, because of COVID. Okay.
Yeah, like it's completely online right now. So
yeah, I was on Zoom before it was cool.
Me
Yeah,
too.
that being a part of an accelerator. So for both Karthik and me, mentorship is always really, really important. And I think that accelerator programs have great mentor networks that you can get connected to and, not just build out a network in your own country, but also, so Karthik and I are based in India and we want to open the product. Launch the product in India, and everyone always sort of asked us, why are you going to a US accelerator that has an office in Singapore? What's the reason? And the reason was that, Karthik and I were very clear that we wanted to also expand globally, and we wanted to build out those networks and sort of build that into our plan. And now having Andrew, Abby, and the whole team with us, Christian, all of them, having them all help us with the planning has been really great, especially because we want to accelerate to a global scale and not just be an Indian company. So yeah, that's our experience.
So just as Kopi mentioned previously, expect a few pivots and surprises as well from Evo's end.
Great. I hope you allow us to get a scoop on it though. When you do pivot, all of you actually, for that matter. Anybody else want to chime in about their experience with an accelerator? And BVI started Big Idea Ventures, right? So BIV, sorry. Yeah.
It was an incredible opportunity for us, especially being such a new company, because we only started last year and we designed our products for the US market, but we thought it would be a couple of years, coming from Australia, to be able to even think about moving over here. So when we got this opportunity, we literally packed up our entire house and took the dog in 1 week and never went back and moved to New York from there.
Wow.
And now in LA.
Best decision, in LA now, but best decision we ever made to launch the company was to, take up BIV's offer and get into the program. And really what a wonderful launch pad for an early stage business where I guess there's still, you might be across some things. Like for us, I had a background in marketing, so we're completely across that. But then there's these other quite naive gaps that we had about, how on earth do you go about finding a co-packer, or just, how do you go about VC fundraising? How does that even work? And that's a perfect kind of accelerator where you can work through all of those stupid questions that you might have, a safe space and come out the other end with them answered.
Anybody else want to? Jared?
Sorry, go ahead.
You wanted to say something, Jared?
Yeah, I was just going to add from my experience, which is I think it can be a very useful path, and I think a couple things to keep in mind is not all accelerators are created equal, and so just like anything else you're signing up for, you should do your own due diligence. It's a two-way vetting process to figure out if what they are offering, if the networks that they have, if the resources that they have match what you need and what you're looking for. And the second thing is along those same lines, I think as a participant, you really have to take advantage of those resources, right? Just because they have a program in place and people in place, it doesn't mean that everything's just going to get handed to you. You're still responsible for running your business, growing your business, and asking for what you need. And what it's offering you is ideally a shortcut, right? What it's doing is it literally accelerating your process and saying like all the things that they offer, you could theoretically find elsewhere. And if you already come with, for example, a strong network, or if you already launched a food business before or something like that, maybe you don't need it. But if not, if you're coming in new, it can be an easy way to really help launch and know that it's kind of like an insurance policy, right? You're giving yourself that extra leg up to get to where you need to be. 100%.
So I'll add to that, because a lot of YC alumni are complaining right now that the network is not relevant to us, because YC is accepting a lot of diverse set of companies, and a lot of them claim that this we could have done in a different way without giving so much equity in general. So yeah, definitely it's a two-way street.
And the wonderful thing about BIV is that it's very targeted in terms of
alternative protein.
Its mission. Yep. So you know that everyone you're being introduced to and all of the workshops that you're doing are directly relevant to the business.
Right.
Well, I think if I were to summarize the advice a little bit, you got to give as much as you take. Sort of, you got to be proactive about it. Pick a accelerator that sort of is knowledgeable about the space, has the networks, has the mentors, so that you don't have to start explaining why you should be eating plant-based cheese, for example.
Totally. And I've had so many of those conversations with investors in the past, still trying to explain the size of the market.
Right. So all of those questions are sort of, obviously given they understand it, they've done this before, they have the pedigree to go with that. So yes, that glad to hear that. I'm sure, some of our audience members are thinking, hey, look, these guys seems to have pulled it off. What do we do next? How do we get about going to do that? So I think, that advice is timely and hopefully useful. Karthika, do we have questions? Like I see some.
Yeah, we do actually. What made Karthik move from plant-based chicken to eggs from part Sudha? Thank you for joining us today, Karthik. For you.
Oh yeah, definitely. So actually, I think the question should be from cell-based to plant-based, if I'm not wrong. So one of the main reasons is that I wanted to have an immediate impact. So in the cell-based side of things, things might take time because of the intensive R&D processes. And that's one of the main reasons, I made the switch to the plant-based side. And, that's why we started Evo Foods and started Evo Foods with Shraddha. So yeah, it's all about the impact for me. And as soon as I can have my impact through my actions, the better it is for me.
Okay. So when did each of you realize that your idea had legs and you can sort of quit your full-time job or whatever and take this up and be an entrepreneur?
For us, it was when an investor we were pitching a restaurant concept to an investor in LA. And in our pitch deck, we'd commercialized some of my partner's recipes and just included it there as my little side hustle. But the investor wasn't interested in the restaurants. He was just interested in the product line concept of cheeses and offered us $2 million to buy the concept from us straight off the bat. And that's when I knew that I potentially had an idea here that had legs. And we didn't take that offer.
Jared?
I would say I knew that, I don't know if I ever knew that it had legs. I just kind of believed in it. But I think for me, it was when I was first prototyping and much like Kobe's experience, I started creating this for myself because I had, my background, my mom had a homemade ice cream store. So I grew up eating full fat dairy ice cream. And when I started moving toward a plant-based diet, everything I tasted sucked. So I started making it. And so when I had developed a recipe that was a lot better than what was already on the market, and I had seen that there were already brands out there on the market, that's when I started thinking about that this was going to be something that was sizable and something that people needed and something that I could contribute to. So that's where the idea kind of developed. And to be honest, for a long time, I never really considered like, oh, is this something I shouldn't do or can't do? I just kind of followed that.
Well, Kobe?
Well, for me, it was, so as I said earlier, we started as a hobby, and through friends, we were introduced to a very famous chef from Israel who at the time was planning on opening a Mediterranean marketplace here in New York City. And she met my wife, thought my wife was adorable, wanted to try this pizza, and she came over and brought one of the most famous restaurateurs here in the city as just the Italian guy to try out our pizza. And before they tried the pizza, they looked us in the eyes and were like, listen, you two are really cute. If we were your parents, we'd tell you, don't even bother going into the restaurant industry. It's heartbreaking. It's a lot of work. You'll never really be happy or successful. Most people fail, blah, 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 blah. And then they try the pizza and they're like, no, you're going to be our pizzeria. And I was making really good money. I had my own office. I had a team of people working for me. And I asked this woman, and I had no experience working in food, and I asked this chef, if you were me, what would you do? and she said, quit your job and go work in a pizzeria. And while I was there, first off, I discovered our new cheese. Before that, we're using cashew cheese that we just made ourselves. And being there and understanding children's allergen concerns was what made me realize that we needed to create a new type of cheese. And then we got accepted into an incubator called Hot Bread Kitchen. It's up here in Harlem. And we were using it just to help us get guidance on how to open a restaurant. And then they just put the numbers in front of us, and they're like, how much could you do with a pizzeria in New York City? And I looked at it, I was like, you could do about $3 million gross a year. That's great. Doesn't that sound great? And they're like, okay, but what is your competitor doing in plant-based cheese? And then we analyzed Dea, and they were doing 55 million at the time. So they really helped put that into perspective, because we had something unique that wasn't available, and they gave us the resources and the tools to really plan for that. And they also really showed us why what we wanted to create was so necessary on a national and global scale. So it was just something that started as a hobby that kind of rolled and rolled and rolled and grew and grew and grew to the point where, I got into BIV. And before the pandemic started, we were about to launch at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, which to me, like being from here, getting to have our product offered in the museum I grew up in was such a cool experience. But what's funny is, and what really makes people stand out as entrepreneurs, is what happened during the lockdown. I think both Jared and Veronica did amazing things of just trying to prove that our business, we as entrepreneurs know what we're doing, and that's why we've created our companies. And it's our passion, and if it wasn't for us, for who we are, none of us would be here. You really, and just one last thing to everyone listening, you really have to believe in yourself. You're going to be rejected a million times. It's going to suck every single time. But if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else will. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons we learned from all the big entrepreneurs out there.
It just becomes a numbers game, Kobe. You get rejected so many times that it doesn't matter anymore. You don't care.
I got married before Tinder, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's all new to me too. So Shraddha and Karthik, how did you guys end up sort of having an aha moment, and why eggs, and and how did the two of you sort of get together and come up with this?
So Kobe, what you said about restaurants being super painful, and it's true. I run a restaurant. Don't get me wrong. I love my restaurant. I love it. But it's just, like Karthik said, I wanted to have a bigger impact. And I definitely saw in my own restaurant that there were a lot of people coming in and were trying to look for alternative sources of protein. So they would ask for tofu or paneer or curd. But, that was it. Like, non-vegetarians, they have so many different types of meat and egg and fish. And there's so many different types of proteins. And I just realized that even on my restaurant menu, I didn't want to be repetitive again and again. But they want more like kinds of proteins that I could add to their meals. And that's, that's always a sort of lack that I felt in my restaurant menu. And then Karthik and I actually met at a food conference, and we connected because I wanted to get his, he was working on his cell-based meat company at the time, and I wanted to sort of have that in my restaurant. And that's when we started talking about the opportunity that exists, because I saw it, because my restaurant was customer facing. I was there every day on the floor. I was doing the work. I was talking to customers. And that's when I realized that there is a lack. There is a lack in the number of alternatives or number of dishes available to vegetarians. And that's when Karthik and I really decided that, there is like this space in the market to create cleaner sources of proteins.
Great. Karthik, I think we have lots more questions, right?
Yes,
so
yes, we do. Yes, we
coming
do.
close to the hour time frame, so let's see
Yeah.
if we can wrap it up in an hour if we can.
Okay. A question from Krishna. Thank you for joining us today. Are there plant sap-based milk that can alternate milk, dairy milk?
What was the question again? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, sorry. Are there plant sap, the sap from the plant-based milk that can alternate milk?
I know there are sap-based drinks, so like maple, birch. I think that's a new trending beverage, but I think they're more on the kind of like soda or water alternative than the milk alternative.
Okay. Right.
Oh, just to add to that, I think the milk experience is kind of fatty. That's why we use nuts or soy or like things like that. And I don't think trees, maple, any of that is very fatty, so you wouldn't get the same kind of result.
Good point.
Okay. All right. And also one other question from the same person, actually. I'm a former chef, passionate towards understanding and committed to alternate food. Would love to connect with Veronica and her partner to understand his side of things. So Veronica, I assume he can connect with you through your website?
Absolutely, or through Instagram.
Yeah. So there you go, Krishna. And also somebody anonymously has asked, so Kobe, you didn't have a team when you were chosen for an accelerator?
Well, my team is my wife and I. We started this together. If it wasn't for her vision, understanding, and social media savvy, we wouldn't have changed our entire lives to do this. But the day-to-day running of the operations, I'm the one with the most experience, so I do that. And my wife is also our support system here. So if it wasn't for her and her job and her insurance, we wouldn't be able to have this company at all. So, but I'm very, back to what's great about being in an accelerator is that you have these amazing mentors that you can rely on that actually end up becoming part of your team. So that was my best experience, is that I have people that I can continue working with past the accelerator point.
Okay.
And I'll add to that, because it sounds like maybe there was an underlying question there of, can you get into an accelerator as a solo founder or someone without a team? And I think the answer is yes. You'll tend to see that investors and accelerators prefer co-founders, they prefer a team, but the solo founders are totally accepted. And I think really what it comes down to, there's two things I would say. One is, much like in a romantic relationship, since we keep using that analogy, it's having the right partner will make you stronger, and having the not right partner will make you weaker than being alone. Yes. So it's important to get that right fit. The second thing is that ultimately what it comes down to, like we were talking about earlier, is do you have the resources available to do the things that need to be done? Whether they're a co-founder, a hire, an outsourced agency or contractor, it doesn't matter. It's, do you have the people who know how to do sales, who know how to do marketing, and who know how to run your operations? And your biggest responsibility is setting the vision and making sure that those resources are in the right place. That's what it comes down to.
Good point. Any more questions?
Yeah, we have a few more. Eggs are very diverse in terms of the use in products. What other, for example, how can they be used in bakeries, confectionery, hot food? So I think they're trying to ask, are you going to be extrapolating from the omelette concept to other things, Shada and Karthik?
Yeah,
absolutely. Because there are, wide variety of applications. In fact, we are already talking with, a bakery B2B supplier, and they supply to a lot of bakeries and cakes places and cafes, etc. And I think there will be really diversified solutions from Evo Foods for the whole egg spectrum, because we are focused on eggs and we believe that it's a huge opportunity everywhere over the globe. So yes, expect us to be, ready for baking, ready for scrambles, quiches, whatever applications you can imagine with egg. We'll be able to do that.
And we feel like even just to add to what Karthik said, it opens up a huge market for us with a lot of vegetarian bakers or vegan bakers all over the world. Like instead of using baking substitutes, they can use like an egg and they don't have to really measure out like, what it would be like an egg. They could bake with something that's basically functions exactly like an egg and not feel, that there's anything lacking.
Wonderful. So, and that'll be here August, September, right? Great.
Bake version will take some time.
Yeah, but the
The omelette and scramble version will definitely be by then.
I think Shraddha mentions it really clearly. So like in India, at least you have these people who want to eat hidden eggs. They don't want to, they just feel guilty if they eat it directly. So they eat it in the form of cookies and cakes.
Right.
Yeah. So like, yeah, that's it.
A hidden egg. I like that idea. You're right.
That's what it's called though.
Yeah, I know.
Shraddha explains it
They're thinking
really
that.
well.
No, it's okay. Don't tell me.
Yeah, Ravi, you have any questions? I'm still curating these questions.
Okay. No, so what I'm hearing, and I think it's very important for a lot of people who are in food or come from countries with lots of different varieties of food, like in the tropics. So I think what your key is, given your ingredient list, that if you find a fat and you find a starch and you find a sort of a sugar and then you put some like water, I mean, you could pretty much make anything, I guess, from what your experience is, get the right combination of those sort of core ingredients. The way, whether it's derived from obviously from a plant or animal, becomes sort of passé, right? And animals obviously are passé now because of the environmental footprint and cruelty and all the other things. So essentially, if you can extract something from a cauliflower or from hemp or from fava beans, and then you mix it with potato and other things, and a fat, essentially you can create a cheese or an ice cream or an egg, right? I mean, that's really where this new revolution in food is about, isn't it? I mean, it's just essentially, and I think we are only talking about a small subset of food, when in fact, I think there are so many hundreds of different varieties of plants and vegetables. I just heard the other day that somebody was making deli meats out of bananas, right? I mean, I just saw a news item, right? I mean, it's just, you're only constrained, it seems, by your imagination. Would you agree with that statement, or?
I mean, I would, because we always tell, like when people ask us, do you like, what's in your egg? And I'm like, well, basically we've repurposed something that, pulses, grains, different types of, things that Indians eat on a daily basis for their breakfast. And we're repurposing it into something else that they also know and love. So it's like you said, yeah, it's repurposing things that act a certain way to act, like an egg or like a gelato or a cheese.
And I'd actually take it a step further. I think that really the long-term goal for this movement is to not just create something that replicates the animal-based products, but actually exceeds them. That's really the long-term plan, and we're just going at these steps along the way.
I didn't want to say that. I'm glad you did it. My point that I was going to. Thank you, Jared. Yes, so it has to be better, right? Essentially, at the end of the day, you want to make it even better.
And also think about all the steps we're saving with producing these types of products. I mean, for cheese, you have to raise a calf, you have to, produce dairy from it, you have to feed that cow every day, you have to transport the milk to the factory.
Very resource intensive. Very resource intensive.
Yeah, it's very resource intensive. And like right now, like our product can be made using the same technology as dairy, but it's 3 steps less than the actual production of cheese, using the exact same equipment. And you're using products that were grown in the ground, and you're using plants and you're repurposing them. And like you said, really it is the imagination, because there's so many different ways to put these foods together using these ingredients. Us as humans, we crave three things: salt, fat, and acid combined together. And if you can put them into the right mix, create the right texture, and use the right machinery or old school ways of producing them, you really can create anything. And just like Jared said, I think right now we're getting to the stage where a lot of these things are exceeding the tastes of traditional foods.
Are we done with all the questions, Kartika?
Yeah, I actually have one final one. Is how and some of these guys were interested in. The question for that is how you go about finding the manufacturing equipment and the plant, and just producing something mass scale. Being a single entrepreneur, how do you do that if you don't have a team?
I think the answer to this question is really simple. Don't find a co-manufacturer. Find someone who can do that for you. I think that's the best approach to this, because that way you can actually use the expertise of that person and not just invest a lot of time by yourself. So do whatever you are really good at and leave the rest to the expert, whatever expert you can find.
Find
people.
a co-packer is what you're saying.
Yeah. A lot of people there are, they are expert in finding out co-packers, identify right kind of instruments for your product, and process scaling, etc. So you don't have to do all by yourself. Just find someone who can do that for you.
Jared, you were going to say something?
I was going to say, completely agree. As someone who found my own co-packer, I think we lucked out in being able to develop a really good relationship with them and all of that. But even so, knowing what I know now, I absolutely would recommend working with someone who really knows the supply chain, knows contract manufacturing, because that's one of those things where that upfront investment will pay itself back time and time and time again.
And Veronica, I think earlier you mentioned like one of the struggles you faced was how do you find a co-packer?
Yeah, it took us we actually couldn't find one that we wanted to use in Australia, which is one of the reasons why we came to the US. There's just much more availability, but still the number of co-packers that are available to small companies in the plant-based space is very, very small, especially if you're coming in with a plant-based product that's also allergen-free. I'm sure Kobe knows the experience. It just really limits the options available to you. So highly recommend getting consultants in to help you go through that process and work out what criteria you're actually looking for and teach you the language of how to negotiate with them is highly, highly recommended.
As a flip side, there is an opportunity for someone to create a dedicated plant-based manufacturing facility.
Totally.
There will be many customers. And even if the brands don't succeed, there will be another one behind them.
So just have multiple production lines for cheese and dairy, whatever else, right?
Even like a pilot facility will work. So like they'll get a lot of revenue out of it.
I believe one of our mentors at BIV is actually working on this because he saw how much the team struggled to find co-packers.
I think I mentioned this to Andrew. I don't remember, but I said, it's like the gold rush, right? I mean, the California gold rush. The people who made the money were the people who sold the pickaxes and the shovels and the pans, not the people who actually dug for gold. So now we have a gold rush in this space. So maybe it is people who do the on the cell-based stuff, who build the structures and all the enabling technology. On the plant-based side, it's the co-packers and some of the ingredient manufacturers, right? That could be helpful. So yeah, I mean, this is a big enough play. I think there's room for lots of players. I think that's what you're saying also. So
yeah, and I just before you go, I just want to add one aspect to it, to what Veronica said. To find an allergen-friendly co-packer was almost impossible, and one of the reasons I had to do that is because when I was doing this on my own without the help of the Accelerator, it was my understanding that no manufacturer would talk to me until I produced big enough volumes. And I was under the impression that I'd have to do all this work on my own before I could even interest a co-manufacturer. And then having the person on the BIV team, the mentor who helped put this all together, find a co-packer for us. He helped save us about $250,000, and he helped bring us to market much quicker than we would ever have to do it ourselves. And the biggest advantage of all of this is now during COVID and during the lockdown, if we were manufacturing ourselves, we would be responsible for rent, we'd be responsible for employees, we'd be responsible for all these different things that would just be sitting there costing money and not making money. And having a people. So all I'm trying to say is if you can find a resource of someone who can help you find a co-packer and has the experience doing that, it's worth spending the money on them because they're going to save you a lot of money and heartache in the long term.
Yeah. And I think one of the best examples of this strategy is the founder of Beyond Meat, Ethan Brown. So if you observe his story, essentially he pushed really hard on licensing that kind of technology from the professors, and he just focused on the more important aspects, like how can we sell it, how can we brand it, how can we create a better company out of it. And the result, right? It's like the best company right now in the alternative protein space.
Exactly. No, thank you. So that was excellent. So thank you very much for all of you joining. Veronica from LA, Kobe from New York, Jared from Atlanta, and Karthik and Sharda from Mumbai, India. I'm from Delhi, and then Karthika from Sri Lanka. So I think we've had a pretty global panel today. Really excited to have you. I mean, it was fascinating to listen to all of the things that you're doing. Too bad none of us can taste your product yet sitting in Delhi, Sri Lanka, given the lockdown, as well as the fact that you want to send it across. But yes, we would love to do that at some point in our lives. And certainly I think Evo is going to beat you all to it, because it's going to be available to at least me at some point in Delhi. So we're definitely looking forward to that. So next week, Tuesday, we have an interesting panel on a similar subject. It's lamb, mutton, chicken, and mince and foie gras made cruelty-free. And because that panel is from Southeast Asia as well as New York, it's going to be at a very, very early hour in India. It's 8:30 in the morning. But that's the only way we could fit in the various time zones. So we're going to have that panel. So if you're interested in that, please register for that. But again, thank you to the wonderful panelists for telling us your stories and your future plans, and also giving some great advice to would-be entrepreneurs in the space. So I thank you very much for joining us from all over the place today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.